Yeah. All right, that's good. Cool.
Well, welcome everyone. Welcome. This is Grace Asagra of Quantum Nurse Podcast, and welcome to Freedom International live stream. And yes, Matthew and all others could always share the screen, and you too, all our viewers, please do share and like if it matters to you and if it resonates to you. Okay, so today we really go, and as usual, we want to deep dive into the critical events shaping our world with fearless analysis and uncompromising truth. So today I am very honored to have good friends with me and good analysts. And of course, with our featured guest today is Matthew Ehret, and he doesn't need a lot of introduction. And I always tell people just put his name and then you'll find a whole array of information and resources and everything that he's been doing. So he's for me a critical event analyst and an author, a multimedia producer as well, because he produces with his team. He produces a lot of things so that that's the way he could reach people and let people understand what's going on. And of course, I'm very happy to have Uwe Alschner, and Uwe also is another geopolitical analyst and an independent journalist. So we're just happy to have those two great minds today. And um, sooner or later, someone else will come, and our good friend Drago Bosnic from BRICS. And I'm always very honored to have Roy Coughlan, whom Roy Coughlan and Hartmut and a few others. We've been like collaborating together this Freedom International live stream for going to 5 years now. So we haven't lost our energy. We just keep getting motivated because we're connected with people like Ehret and Uwe Alschner. So thank you very much. And um, let me see. Hey, Drago. Thank you. And there's Drago.
Hi everyone. Sorry about being late. My camera is the issue as always.
So let's see, where was I? Well, maybe. So the topic that I was thinking now, because more than ever, as I always say, that this is the time where all of us should continue and never let go of studying. And words like Malthusian, it's been like heard for a million times, but maybe we could truly understand with Matthew leading us and going to this conversation on how an Austrian and British Malthusian brainwashed a generation of Americans. And of course, since many things are currently going on, especially in America with the current administration, and then Trump is started with a very strong start, and whatever that may mean for us and for others, let's connect that. And as I continue, sometimes now and then I would listen to the confirmations of different figures that Trump appointed. You could really see some of the shadows that this brainwashing continues. So I thought, Matthew, he will be the best person. And of course, thank you as always to all of you there, our first time viewers. Please continue to connect with us. Matthew, how about you start where these people can find you? Why don't you just invite and tell them the volumes of books and many things that you have accomplished and continue to do?
Now, yeah, I wrote. Okay, sure. Yeah, thank you for the always very gracious introductions, and I'm super stoked to just improvise and chat with you guys. Drago, Uwe, what a fantastic surprise to have you guys come into this conversation. This is going to be good. So yeah, thank you, Roy. Thank you, Grace. For myself, yeah, I wrote a lot of books. Clash of the Two Americas is where I guess a lot of the content of today's considerations are going to be derived from that 4-volume book series. Sort of trying to, where I did my best to try to reconstruct in the best way I could a better story explaining the events from 1776 through the various precarious moments in U.S. history leading to our current moment, which is a historical moment, underdeveloped as it is, caught between two systems, two possible paradigms for the future. And I really wanted to try to find what would be what is it about America that allowed it to survive or to come into being in the first place, and then to survive attacks from the outside as well as from fifth columnists representing the deep state from within over 2 centuries? And what was it about that ability to survive that was tied to something which is premised on the principle of win-win cooperation, an idea of natural law, and a consideration which today is ironically being defended principally by those nations that are deemed by most people to be the most un-American nations of the world, China, Russia, and the broader multipolar alliance, which has really taken up that torch, representing that higher idea that it's not might makes right, but rather right which makes might, in that our self-interest should be predicated upon creating the basis of peace, cooperation, not divide to conquer, not subjugation of the masses for the benefit of an elite. So that's a historical irony that I wanted to just shed light on, and considering that today the way that we are being steered like cattle has a lot to do with our susceptibility to playing by rules of a game which is rigged, that we cannot win. And among those core rules in the sort of the terrain of the mind, right? Because the history is shaped by ideas, good ideas and bad ideas. But in that battlefield of the mind, the mechanism of control is are these false opposites, these controlled oppositions, and we're given false choices to give us the illusion of freedom, but we'd have none of it if we play by these rules. And in the West, the way it's been geared is that you either have to be a champion or an adherent to top-down thinking alone, or which is sort of technocratic, very cold, and it usually takes the form of a Keynesian mindset, which has largely penetrated most of the liberal and democratic left establishments of the world, especially during the Cold War. And that's your sort of the thing you have to adhere to, as a Keynesian worldview, on the one hand. Or if you want to resist that, then you could find yourself on the so-called right opposition groupings, and thus you would typically be expected to pay homage to libertarianism, the Austrian school, followers of Friedrich von Hayek especially, as the solution. And you know, Klaus Schwab made it very clear, not that just a few months ago, when he gave this ridiculous speech saying the only threat to the Great Reset is libertarianism. And it's like, come on, if you say that out loud publicly, you're basically trying to get people to become libertarians. And as I try to get across in my books and a recent trilogy of essays that I guess you picked up on, Grace, that I recently published on my Substack, both Keynes and John Maynard Keynes and Friedrich von Hayek were lifelong friends. They were part of the exact same conspiracy. They were pushing the exact same core axioms embedded within their seemingly opposed structures of political economy. The identical axioms, as far as a promotion of a belief in Thomas Malthus, in the socialization of Darwinian principles of natural selection onto the macro system of human life, the laws of the jungle as such. They just had different sort of approaches mechanically on how to manage those assumptions. World government was another big assumption that they both actually extolled, and people who are libertarian might be surprised to hear that a high priest of the Austrian school like von Hayek would promote world government, but read his Road to Serfdom and the last chapter, and he does. So just like Friedrich von Hayek, just like John Maynard Keynes. And the reality of what the principle is that I identify as being exhibited by Russia and China and the broader multipolar alliance today in its best sense, not that there aren't problems, but in the best sense of it, could be found in the lost traditions of the American system of political economy that people like Franklin Roosevelt fought for, revived in his time while president, that John F. Kennedy tried to revive again earlier. Lincoln, McKinley had embodied that when they were killed. And that is something that is just lost in this polarizing debate of left versus right, top down versus bottom up dichotomizations. And so, yeah, I'm hoping we can flesh through some of that for the audience today.
Thank you, Matt. So how about we start with, maybe sharing what are their core beliefs? And from that question, perhaps if you wanted to start sharing already whatever you have in the screen, please feel free. And to Roy, Drago, and Uwe, please feel free also to come on and join us with this conversation, okay?
Yeah. Does anybody else want? You want me to just jump in with an image or two, or does anybody else want to?
Oh, I mean, I'm happy to listen to what you have to say. So I'm enjoying the masterclass on this.
All right, cool. Yeah, sure. So yeah, like Ray said, just hop right in. I do talk a lot. It can be a bit of a fire hose sometimes, and I apologize. So yeah, just break in if you need to. But I'll try to stop and give some silence so people can ask a question. Yeah, Grace just shared my screen. And for those who don't know the faces of Friedrich von Hayek and John Maynard Keynes, so that part of the creation of this dichotomization that became the foundation for the reorganization of the Republican Party, the most conservative parties in the West, which became infused with this Austrian school ideology during the Cold War, and the liberal sort of parties of the Democratic Party in the US, Liberal Party of Canada, that became infused with this Keynesian ideology. This was largely sparked in a very contrived debate in 1932 in October, during the height of the Great Depression, when people were at their maximum despair. You know, they'd been living under several years already of death and decay and famine across the transatlantic. And of course, as I get through in my books and these articles, the Great Depression itself, just like today's Great Reset agenda, was very, an organized, controlled demolition of the Western banking system. And that controlled demolition had a lot to do with the transformation of an industrial orientation, which America traditionally had in the 19th century. And especially after the death of McKinley, there was a 30-year period where it was mostly traders dominating the U.S. Washington, D.C. There were patriots in Congress, but mostly between Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, two promoters of eugenics and two promoters of the Anglo-American special relationship, all the way through Calvin Coolidge and President Herbert Hoover. What you had was a foreign-directed takeover of the U.S. Some of this peaked in the 1913 creation of the Federal Reserve and the income tax law under Senator Aldrich, who is closely baked into the Rockefeller machinery. The Vorburg banking machinery had also gained a huge amount of influence into the U.S. establishment after the death of McKinley. Even before that, really, after the death of Lincoln, it had gotten really powerful. But really, after McKinley was murdered in 1901, this thing got really out of hand. And again, these groups began turning the U.S. into an Anglo-American recaptured state that would act more and more like an empire, imposing in its imperial system abroad through military force. And we saw this with the United Fruit Company, the entire deep state complex that began to smash governments that were trying to defend their national interests in the Philippines and in Colombia and in Latin American countries galore. And this was Teddy Roosevelt's abuse of the Monroe Doctrine. We saw that get out of hand. And the forced privatization of vast sections of small countries' interests into Standard Oil. Anybody just needs to read Smedley Butler's expose of war as a racket in 1935 to get a good grasp of what this was. So just to get across, it wasn't like America was this great thing without problems. It had this huge problem, but it wasn't authentically American either, right? And that's part of the irony of this whole thing, is that this thing that killed these American presidents represented a banking interest that's tied to the old nobilities of Europe, that's tied in the case of the city of London as a nerve center of world capital, world control then as it is today, and that created this grotesque cancer inside of America that would have it serve the interests not of the American people or even the nation itself, but of this private supranational financier class. So they're the ones who created the bubbles of the 1920s by deregulating the markets under Coolidge. They pushed massive ideological free trade, which benefited only a speculative class that created a giant unpayable debt bomb and bubble based on gambling with people's savings. And that peaked in 1929 when there was a coordinated calling out of broker call loans. And at that moment, when there were as the story goes, everybody who was on the JP Morgan's preferred clients list, including, high-level members within the U.S. government itself that were in charge of Coolidge's economic policies, if they were on the preferred clients list, then they had insider knowledge and were able to sell their stocks before the coordinated blowout of the banking system. For those not on the list, they didn't know, and they lost everything. And there was a massive wealth transfer. So the economy was driven down into shambles by design, and the agriculture, the farmland that was purchased by these speculators, these financial interests, the real estate which is purchased for pennies on the dollar when people were foreclosed upon, was not it was not turned into productive things. They kept the agriculture stagnant. They kept the industries foreclosed and shut down. So it's not like they wanted to do business or make money even. It would have been better business, and they could have made more money if they worked to reactivate the physical economy, but they didn't, because the idea was not to do things for money. Although we have been told here in our present day that everything is done for money. It's not true. There's a higher, if you control trillions of dollars, you don't care about money. You care about power. So they kept the economy in a desperate state, and people were very susceptible by 1932 to all sorts of ideas that would have involve, flushing their freedoms for the sake of being able to feed their kids. So a lot of new political economic doctrines were being floated, which many of them were reprehensible and weird, but they were being sort of treated more seriously. Italian corporatist fascism was one of them. The various variations of corporatism in a fascist veneer were being spread all over Europe, in Vichy France, in Germany. We saw that under the National Socialists, who had their own, idea of what fascism was, but it still required the capital of City of London, Bank of England financiers, Wall Street bankers, and industrialists that had to pour tons of capital and support into the Nazi war machine to even make, or Nazi machinery in general, to make it viable. So it wasn't like a truly nationalist thing at all. And it was very eugenics oriented, as they all were. So all that to say, 1932 is when you had, within the London School of Economics, which was a Fabian Society school. It was created by the Fabian Society, a think tank geared to promote a global reset of civilization under a bunch of misanthropic, anti-humanist British grand strategists like H.G. Wells, Bernard Shaw, the Webbs, Beatrice and Sidney, and many others. Bertrand Russell was a member of the Fabians for a period. They created both the Labour Party in 1901 as their political branch in England, and they created the London School of Economics in 1896 or so as sort of the indoctrination center for a new class of managerial elites that would be trained and then sent back to different parts of the empire to manage basically a restoration of the proper grandeur of global control by a British Empire under a different name. So this school became the hub in 1932 of this very contrived debate between these two lifelong friends, both Malthusians, of von Hayek and Keynes, and their debates were published in the London Times. And this was largely done to try to, both of them were basically debating how to deal with the Great Depression, you know, and on the one hand, you had Keynes pushing his doctrine that asserted we have to use government controls to expend capital and to make work, with the logic that Keynes was spinning, which had an element of truth but a lot of lies embedded within, or a lot of fallacies, which is in the Keynes system. It was his idea was, okay, if government spends money to make work, people with work will get paychecks, and that paychecks they will use to buy things, food and soap and whatever, and the act of buying things will create a demand for industries to become created to produce those things they want to buy, and the industries then will, because they need to now produce things, have more demand on the state to build like electricity grids, infrastructure, that the heavy industry requires a lot of energy, a lot of infrastructure, capital intensive infrastructure. And so the idea was then that will then justify maybe the creation of big projects. But so in the Keynesian worldview, the fallacy is that he makes no qualitative differentiation for productive work or non-productive work. In his worldview, it's purely mathematical, and it's purely based on the idea that it doesn't matter that, as you know, one example that people often use, but it's true. No Keynesian can refute this. In his system, it's perfectly fine to pay 10,000 people to dig holes and then pay another 10,000 people to fill the holes up. And because both sides are getting paychecks, the system is going to somehow recover. And it's absurd because you're doing nothing. You're wasting energy, if anything. And, so anyway, it took an element of what the American system tradition that was also being fought and revived at that time. It was Franklin Roosevelt, who was clearly going to become the president of the United States. And he represented a very different current going back to Lincoln and Hamilton. There was an element of utilizing the nation to direct credit for building things, but in the American system view, it clearly differentiates productive from unproductive labor. The value is on those activities that increase the productive powers of labor and specifically enrich the quality of mind of the citizens to make discoveries, to leap beyond the limits to growth. That's built into the writings of Hamilton, Friedrich List, Henry C. Carey. It's baked into this American system that Roosevelt had studied and was reviving. That had to be subverted. And on the other side, you had, Hayek, who had himself been an advisor for an early fascist government of Austria when the Austro-Hungarian government was dissolved after World War I. He was actually the assistant to Ludwig von Mises, who was the special advisor to the lead economic advisor to the Austrian government, which had the view that when you're in an economic crisis, you don't spend money, you just privatize and you cut the budget. So austerity, budget cuts, privatizing. You can make money by privatizing state things, and by just tightening your belt, somehow a recovery is going to happen. And that's what they did in Austria in 1919 under von Mises and Hayek's control. And they were saying, look, we did such a great job because we didn't get a hyperinflation the way they did in Weimar Germany. And it's like, yeah, but you still, the effect was not that dissimilar. People's lives were ruined. You didn't make the economy better. You just didn't go hyperinflationary, because in Germany they just printed money, but they didn't actually build any real economy to undo the inflationary effect of money printing. That was 1923 when the Weimar, blew up, and people were like lighting money on fire to stay warm because it was cheaper to do that than to buy wood. But the effects were the same. There was a massive bloodletting of jobs, of security, and it's sort of similar to what's being done today under Javier Milei, where people are saying, oh, look, the economy of Argentina is doing great because of Austrian school privatizations of the economy and austerity. This is what's also being pushed by Elon Musk in the Doge part of the government. But it's like, if you look at what they're doing, it's an illusion. They're creating money by privatizing things. So there's an illusion of revenue created by Argentina as a state. Just like there was an illusion of revenue being created for a certain period at different moments under Hayek's influence in Austria. But it's an illusion, because just like today, if you look at what types of industries are growing in Argentina, it's all extractive. The actual manufacturing, the productive parts of the industry, that's all been shut down. They're not doing that. It's just that they're getting rid of government regulation that has been preventing extractive practices of lumber and of natural gas and things. So they've been increasing that, not to be used for their own people or used by their own markets, but just for, export purposes. Meanwhile, they've been shutting down social security, pensions. Poverty has been increasing, not decreasing, and it's creating this very momentary appearance of growth, but it's actually sabotaging the means of future actual durable growth. So that was sort of the Hayek approach to the Great Depression. And of course, FDR didn't go for either one of those extremes. And even though we've been told that FDR was a Keynesian, the fact is, and I prove it, I think, pretty conclusively in my books and my papers, going to the actual writings of FDR, who is talking about Keynes, and Keynes talks about FDR, they hate each other. FDR thinks that Keynes is a mathematical fetishist, and Keynes thinks FDR is an incompetent buffoon. But we've been told that anyway. That's been the story that we've been given, is that FDR was a Keynesian, and sure enough, only those narratives or historical revisionists that advance that thesis have been permitted to be published widely, and those who have actually told the truth have been shut down. So this lie has just continued over generations.
How about Trump? Where is he leaning on?
I think of him as more of a pragmatist. I don't think he's ideologically anything. As far as like a school of political economy, he's got. He seems to be more of the type of old school business class who just wants to do things to get things done. And so he'll be inclined to, I think, extract from different advisors and economists things that he finds useful to get something done, whether it's get rid of regulation or whether it's, restore protectionism, which is clear. It's like, if you want to rebuild manufacturing, you need to have protectionism, because there's no way local manufacturing, which has been destroyed by 50 years of globalization, can compete with cheap crap from poor countries that have been baked into globalization for decades and decades. You can't. So the only way to do that is you need to start bringing back protectionism, which is antithetical to the Austrian school model. But at the same time, he has a lot of Austrian school advisors. So and so even though he's pushing for state directed policies like protectionism on the one hand, doesn't mean he's Keynesian either, because he's also very much favorable to getting rid of regulation, favoring the business class, doing things that involve providing incentives to creating entrepreneurs. So I think that he's more of a pragmatist. I wouldn't categorize him directly as one of those two. And I would tend to place him a little bit more into the lineage of Franklin Roosevelt, a little bit, but he's got big problems on that front. I would be very confident saying that John F. Kennedy was a self-conscious representative of the Franklin Roosevelt intellectual tradition. I would not be confident saying that type of giving that label to a Trump either. I think he's got a lot more holes. For example, he tends to, I believe he really thinks that Andrew Jackson was awesome. I think he thinks that. And to the degree that you think that, there's big intellectual problems that you will have about understanding what the American system was.
Uwe, do you have anything to say? Because I know your audio is on. Go ahead.
Do I have anything to say? I'm not sure. What I can say is that these insights which Matt and his wife Cynthia, so the Rising Tide Foundation, Canadian Patriot, what they are providing has been extremely helpful to me understanding, or at least getting a better grip on what is happening at the moment. And at the first instant, it might seem counterintuitive to some people why the American system is something which is so important when this world now seems to be so heavily dominated by America, and America being at the root of many evils allegedly in the world, which in some way is even something you could argue. However, I have come to understand from Matt's work and Cynthia's work and the philosophical foundations, which is the basis for all of this. And I can only recommend people to dig deep into those resources which are provided by especially Rising Tide Foundation, is something that is, to me as a German, has become so clear now that I can only encourage all of us to rally around this idea of a great republic and the United States being the one which was created first, created against oligarchy and especially the British Empire, which still wields a lot of power today, even though it may seem impotent to many. It's not. So therefore, the British oligarchy, they have the habit of not forgetting. They remember the blows they have received and the defeats they have been suffering. So therefore, I think what one can argue what is ongoing now is a concerted effort to take down this American system in its entirety for good, which hasn't succeeded so far, as Matt has been laying out in his books so eloquently. So therefore, I, as a German now, try to raise awareness to my compatriots, to my fellow Germans, to understand that this is something which is behind the superficial veneer of things we get in the news. But what would be more devious and maybe even has more potential to succeed in assuming the sheep's clothing by the wolf, which is the Fabian symbol, just the other way around. Now the wolf jumping into the original sheep, America, and making it appear as the wolf, and everyone else trying to shoot the wolf, which would be, I think, what many people in London and elsewhere would love to see these days. So this is something which I would like to thank Matt for and pointing it out to me in this clarity. And I'm still continuing to learn and to put stuff together. And of course, it's also relevant to what is going on today with all those crisis spots we see on the globe. There's more to it than meets the eye.
Oh, thanks, dude. Yeah, no, I love that example of acting like getting America to act like the wolf, and then the people want to kill the wolf, and that is sort of this. Michael Billington with the EIR, he had given this imagery some years back that I also like. That's in tandem, which was that after FDR died, and even before FDR was even president, the policy was, especially with Teddy Roosevelt, but then again it came back with a vicious vengeance with Harry Truman, was to get the U.S. to be the dumb giant for the British Empire. And the empire is not what people think it is. It's not the British people. It's not even the British government for the most part. It's this, as you inferred, it's this insidious, supranational set of institutions that utilize the things like the crown as one of a variety of mechanisms of control and management of a global system, which is above the structure of the visible part of governments. It's the invisible empire, and it operates through banking, through offshore Cayman Islands, operations, which is again a British hub of global money laundering, which is just a necessary part of the maintenance of this official system of empire, which is not supposed to be talked about or spoken about or even looked at in polite society, but it's vital for the system to be maintained. The creation of black budgets, terrorist financing, money laundering from drugs. It's baked in by design into the system from the top. The management of resources in Africa, by typically, or up until recently, mostly British Commonwealth connected mineral and oil and gold companies of, from De Beers to Lonerho to Barrick Gold, and that's just part. It's a system that only a few are permitted to be allowed to look at if they've been selected because of, they've been tested, they passed those tests, they've been selected, they've been from the right families in most cases. In some cases they weren't, and they were just given a Rhodes Scholarship, or they found themselves invited to an inner club because they had a certain profile and a certain hunger to excel and to be part of the inner clubs. And they were given a different set of experiences in their university, coming out of Eton or Cambridge, as coming into the Cambridge Apostles, which John Maynard Keynes, for example, was a leading Cambridge Apostle. Every year there's only 12 of them. These are those young people who will be selected for greater responsibilities in the management and continuity of the empire after they get out of university. Bertrand Russell was another Cambridge Apostle. Alfred North Whitehead was another Cambridge Apostle. There's only so many of them, but they get a very different set of educational experiences than your typical college student going to community college in any country of the world, or even most of the students at Oxford or at Cambridge. I would say most of them don't get to be part of the inner club. But for those who do, they get to appreciate these more subtle but very real structures of control that are tied to a system of hereditary institutions, fondies that are transmitted generationally, that are tied to certain families, that are directly connected to the old patrician class that managed the Roman Empire, that had former, iterations even before the Roman Empire became the Roman Empire, in the Grecian aristocracy and the Egyptian and Babylonian aristocracies. And I don't think those all disappeared with the collapse of the Babylonian Empire, or the Persian Empire, or the empire that Greece became after it abandoned its better republican traditions and became more imperial. I don't think that those families or the associated mystery cults that became today's modern secret societies, but they're directly tied to the old mystery cults, the initiatory degrees of cults that were active and shaping the wars, the intelligence, the counterintelligence, the acceptable religious cults of the ancient world. There was a high priesthood that had managed a system of grooming and sustaining its system of control, also through banking. People, the cult of Delphi, or the cult of Apollo at Delphi has been demonstrated to be one of the dominant banking hubs of the 4th century to 2nd century BC. And people kings would travel from abroad to be told what the gods would want them to do politically, that the high priesthood would interpret from the doped up priestess, the oracle, the Sibyl, and they would pay tons of money. And with all of this accumulation of fortune that was being given to the priesthood, they were able to start doling out loans, to both sides of every conflict. And you could see just how easy it would be to get superstitious kings and generals and businessmen to start making decisions that would affect the lives of millions, based on what the oracles told them to do. And it's not that dissimilar from the astrologers that have penetrated White Houses, parliaments of Latin America, the US, that advise, kings and presidents and prime ministers. And it's a thing, Ronald Reagan had White House astrologers coming in with him and Nancy getting seances. Calvin Coolidge had mediums coming in throughout the 1920s, telling him and his whole cabinet what they should do for foreign policy and for economic policy. And it's a thing. It's a serious thing. And you could see how if you can get decent people, a lot of these people are not are not bad. They're just superstitious. They don't know how their minds work. They become very susceptible to taking on advice from very compromised priestesses and oracles and whatever channelers that are highly controlled by intelligence agencies that just want us to destroy the lives of most people to enslave them at the end of the day, you know? So all that to say, this is where I just see that FDR had a pretty good mapping of this occult agency. He developed a good sense of it while he was the naval secretary during World War I. He was the Secretary of the Navy. And in my research, including in a new book that I just published, Revenge of the Mystery Cults, Volume 2, it was FDR that carried out the best counterintelligence of the occult networks of Aleister Crowley that had a huge penetration into the U.S. White House of Woodrow Wilson, that was transmitting information across the ocean at Montauk to German high command, that was being advised by a bunch of theosophical connected anthroposophists like Rudolf Steiner, who was advising von Moltke, the general, the head of the general staff of the German army. he had his personal guru in the form of Rudolf Steiner, who had formerly headed, Lucifer Gnosis magazine for the Theosophists, and was the head of the German Theosophists for many years before he branched off in 2012 to create his own spin-off group, which still carried most of the core cosmological theories of Madame Blavatsky and Annie Besant. A lot of that was still just carried over, but given a bit more of a Gnostic Christian rebranding for people who didn't want to give up Christianity so fervently. But yeah, he became the guru of the guy who became the head of the German army, and made all of the terrible decisions, and fell into every obvious trap that Otto von Bismarck never would have fallen into. This guy von Moltke was given all of the advice, to the worst advice ever, and just had the worst instincts, and got Germany enmeshed in a totally unwinnable, wasting war. And a lot of that was made possible by the intercommunication of these occultists on both sides of the ocean, and this huge penetration around Aleister Crowley in the United States was really important. And FDR and the Office of Naval Intelligence had the only competent detective agency that I could see that was actually on the ball, that wrote reports that were declassified many years later that I've read, going through a mapping of what these agencies were and how they were being sponsored by the Sleepy Hollow Country Club of William Rockefeller, which was sort of the British Anglo-American intelligence operations set up that generated the Jekyll Island meetings, that oversaw the creation of the Federal Reserve, that saw the creation of the IRS, that saw the creation of the FBI, and it was all steered by British intelligence before World War I. And it was interfacing with Aleister Crowley and this whole thing. They used Tesla as well, and the Tesla towers were part of the communication systems, which is why the U.S. government, under FDR's charge, oversaw the demolishment of Tesla's towers, which were funded by a German cartel in Long Island, New York. So, FDR came. He was born into a very rich family. They had different ideas of how they were going to use this guy, multi-generational, upper establishment American family. A lot of his family members were not great, but he was a patriot first. And through his learning of what the nature of the structure of evil was, both within his own family as well as within the American political establishment that he was hobnobbing with, he got a better mapping of how this thing operated. And then coming out of his brush with death that involved him losing the ability to walk after, they say, polio. It might have been something that had to do more with some jabs. But point being, he became an extremely humble, very, very strong-willed person with a good sense of evil and a good sense of America's better historical currents. And he was able to take these lessons with some very good advisors representing both parties, which I get across in my book series. I map out some of the key leaders of this McKinley-Lincoln movement, both in the Republican and Democratic Party, that worked with FDR, that got him made that got him to become president in 33. Around the same time as Kurt von Schleicher had also been elected or appointed Chancellor of Germany, who had a very similar idea of undoing the damage of Versailles, undoing the damage of the hyperinflation and the Great Depression by restoring an American system policy for Germany in 1932 in January when von Schleicher became chancellor. He had a whole program of empowering members of the Friedrich List movement in Germany, von Lautenbach being one of the leading champions of the revival of Friedrich List's policies that earlier only Otto von Bismarck had advanced to create the Zollverein to apply what Hamilton did in America into the German context and do that again in the 1930s. And this is why I think Schleicher had to be taken out, which he was. And fortunately, FDR survived his assassination attempts and was able to be much more successful in the reactivation of this policy than was seen overseas when Adolf Hitler and the Nazi war machine was brought in to replace Schleicher, whom they soon killed. And instead, they had their own program of basically growing this eugenics-loving transhumanist, proto-transhumanist machinery, sponsored by the Bush family, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, all of those groups that were pushing American. What's the word I'm looking for? Abstinence? No, not abstinence. America's isolation. Yeah, from participating in putting down the Nazi war machine. Of course, they were the ones who were pushing things like they were running the American Liberty League as the big American think tank that was against getting the U.S. involved in the war, because they were the ones working with the Nazis. They're the ones who had the promise, the agreement to carve up the world under a new world order where they would get their jurisdictional control. They poured hundreds of millions of dollars into growing Nazism, into growing eugenics as the new religion. And of course, they didn't want America to jump in and put down the thing that was they put so much effort into growing as the big solution to the Great Depression. So these are very dangerous things. Yeah.
When you say Roosevelt survived his assassination attempts, he died in April 1945, just after the decision to dissolve the Bank of International Settlement had been taken and was not carried out under his successor Truman. I mean, this is also an interesting data point.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, like I was referring to the earlier February 1933 assassination attempt by this anarchist Freemason who, luckily, a woman in the audience saw this guy pull out the gun and hit his hand as he was firing, and he ended up shooting several other people, and he killed the mayor of Chicago, Cermak, who was standing next to FDR that day. And then there was the business coup that could have easily involved FDR dying, if not being just overthrown. I'm not too sure what the plan was for FDR specifically there, but Smedley Butler was tired of being a whore for international big business and instead blew the whistle and gave a recording that was screened across cinemas around America and radio channels documenting his role as he was recruited to this business plot to install him as a fascist puppet dictator. And that again bought FDR a lot of time to revive this American system to the degree that he did. But then, as you said, he died a very mysterious, quick death, probably by poisoning, according to Stalin's assessment, which was delivered to FDR's son and personal secretary, Elliot, years later, which was published in a series of interviews. But then, as you pointed out, when FDR was alive, he gave as much protection and support to Harry Dexter White at the Bretton Woods conference in 1944, which against John Maynard Keynes, who was the absolute nemesis of Harry Dexter White and FDR's vision of what the post-war world was going to be. And it's been so written out of history, but when you look at the documents of the battles at Bretton Woods, it was only the Americans who supported the aspirations of India, of African delegations and South American, all of these countries that have been abused by colonialism. They wanted industrial sovereign power of the right to stand on their own 2 feet. They wanted that that idea of what the New Deal did for uplifting America during the Great Depression. They wanted that versions of the New Deal internationally for their own people to end hunger and to stand as full spectrum economies, which John Maynard Keynes was absolutely against. The British delegation stood up and resisted that, but the Americans were giving their full support, signed off on development programs in China and India, around the world. And it was a great hope for everyone that finally a new paradigm was being forced in by a real great power that had the strength to withstand the types of like manipulations of the British Empire for the first time ever in a serious way. And within that conference, as you pointed out, there was a vote to unanimously dissolve the Bank for International Settlements, the sort of central bank of central banks that was so vital in growing the Hitler machine. And it was passed. They just didn't actually have time to act upon it. And by the time that any action to carry out the dissolution was in place, FDR had died prematurely on April 12th of 45. And all of those institutions that he had envisioned as being forces that would assist in the annihilation of imperialism and the support of nations to really will fully become industrial sovereign nation states, the IMF, the World Bank, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the UN, these institutions increasingly became co-opted by America's enemies that oversaw FDR's the sabotage of his program, both within America as well as abroad, probably his murder. And these involved people like the Rhodes Scholarship, the Rhodes Trust groupings, the Fabian groupings that had overseen the creation of the Council on Foreign Relations as the American branch of the British Roundtable. These were things that took over control, that steered the creation, or the creation of the UN Constitution, the Charter, which was still viable. It still defended, it still had good things in it, but they were able to introduce Trojan horses like Articles 52 to 56 that allowed for the creation of regional blocks, which FDR never intended. But with those Articles 52 to 56, these were like the Coudenhove-Kalergi articles that Kalergi had been advocating since the 1920s when he was still overseeing the pan-European fascist movement that Hjalmar Schacht was a member of. And many leading Italian fascists were members and supporters of the pan-European fascist operation of Coudenhove-Kalergi. Otto von Habsburg became a leading figure of this thing for many, many years. But when he would come to America, and he wrote many books about his travels to America, he was directly interfacing with the Council on Foreign Relations. That was his prime headquarters, and that's what he was working with when he was overseeing the drafting of things like those articles in the UN Charter that allowed for the creation of NATO, that allowed for the creation of the EU. Without those articles, there would be no legal basis for the creation of NATO in 49 or the EU later on. So they were Trojan horses by design to subvert the type of policy of protecting sovereign nation states that was embedded in Articles 1 through 4 of the UN Charter, or the non-intervention into poor country, into the idea that war for dominance would be made illegal was a very important concept of the UN Charter as well, that became sort of worthless if you have these regional blocks based on Hobbesian political logic of pan European fascism. It didn't really matter anymore. The same thing for the North American Union idea that they're also trying to create, modeled on the Coudenhove-Kalergi model. That was something that's also been a thing. So yeah.
Matthew, question regarding the Council of Foreign Relations. Are countries like China and Russia, are they part of the Council of Foreign Relations? And how does the President of the United States have the power to get us out of the Council of Foreign Relations?
It's just a private think tank. It's not a thing we're in or not in. It's just a think tank that's been grafted onto the U.S. think tank apparatus. And it's just super influential. And yeah, you don't have to listen to it or abide by it. You know, that's Hillary Clinton called it the mothership when they set up their Washington offices, because they were originally just set up in New York. And originally they were crafted in 1919 by a roundtable meeting at the Hotel Majestic in France. That was the meeting that happened in conjunction with the Versailles Treaty and the you know, all of the programs that Lord Alfred Milner and his associated roundtable clique had overseen to dissolve things like the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, after World War I was finished, a war that they artificially had orchestrated years even before World War I began. The ball was already set into motion to induce Germany to self-destruct, and Russia, which they both, I mean, this is something that, again, in my books, I try to get across, that one of the governing fears of the empire is the reactivation of a Russia, German, US special relationship of cooperation around industrial progress. That had been seen in contexts like in the wake of Abraham Lincoln's victory over the Confederacy, as the American system was spreading and was being embraced most wholeheartedly by Otto von Bismarck's Germany and Tsar Alexander II and III's Russia,
which also had received a tremendous boost when the Nord Stream pipeline agreement between Germany and Russia was struck in the 2010, 2012, something like this, between Merkel and Putin. Yeah. This was a huge scare for, well, I wanted to say to the private think tank character of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is true. Of course, it's private. But I mean, we've heard so much about the grooming of politicians who will go through various programs and be assessed and characterized and profiled. But in terms of foreign policy, I think at least in the Western Hemisphere, there's hardly any staff member who gets picked for positions in foreign offices or even parliamentary committees who has not been assessed and trained by Council on Foreign Relations, Deutsche Gesellschaft für Auswärtige Politik, Chatham House, or whatever. So this is also an important factor below everyone's radar, because most people don't understand the importance of those staffers who provide the daily work for those people who eventually go to conferences and agree on stuff. This has all been prepared by people who need to be trusted.
Right. Yeah, good point. And no, China doesn't have. There are think tanks in China, but it doesn't have the same relationship. I mean, I don't think that there's any roundtable think tank that has any influence in China at all. I don't think that there is any evidence that I've seen that such a thing exists, or in Russia. If there was any type of think tanks that were tied to them, it would have grown up in the case of Russia in the 1990s and probably shut down by now. I mean, Russia kicked out George Soros and shut down the Open Society Foundations back in 2015. They probably waited way too long for that, but it happened. China was smarter. They kicked out Soros and shut down Open Society Connected Foundations back in 1989. So they were much more intelligent and on point. They didn't allow for a Gorbachev moment to strike China. That nearly did happen in the late 80s, called Tiananmen Square. But there's in the West, like Uwe was saying, there's a vetting process. So it's you've got these sort of secular priesthood churches, grooming centers that you have to pay fealty to for most people who want to play the political game. And you'll find that a disproportionate number of high officials who are going to be appointed to positions of real political influence tend to be processed in varying degrees through these vetting systems manifested by the Brookings Institute, which, might be a little bit older than the CFR, not quite as powerful, but still very powerful. you know, and it was run for many, many years by Strobe Talbot, a Rhodes Scholar, who brought in another Rhodes Scholar, Jake Sullivan, to and another Rhodes Scholar, Susan Rice, who all worked together to oversee the 1990s perestroika. That was Strobe Talbot's. He was the point man, interfacing with Al Gore and George Soros in Russia. He's the guy who oversaw Russiagate as well in America. He brought in his own, Igor Doshenko, the guy who put his own Christopher Steele dossier together, and even who Christopher Steele used as his intelligence source was a Brookings Institute character. So you got these things that are there that interface with the other roundtable operations like the CFR, which is very active in Canada. It's tied directly to George Soros's new Institute for Economic Thinking, sort of university giant think tank that was created in 2008 to train young creatives to come up with ideas that they would think were their own, as far as ideas of what new economic paradigms could be that would replace the liberal model, which was designed to blow up. That's why neoliberalism was created, was as a temporary nation stripping time bomb. It was never created to be the permanent thing. But, when the time bomb blew, there would need to be a new system brought online that would have 21st century characteristics of feudalism. And so they had to sort of encourage young people to come up with ideas that they would be paid for. And Soros's Institute for New Economic Thinking was designed to be that thing that was, again, tied very much to the Canadian Roundtable movement, which provided its early funding. Still very active today. Actually, it's based upon the original new economy policy directly that was brought into Russia in the 1920s. It's not that different, History's not that. There's a repetition. And that, if you look at what Trotsky was doing, interfacing with a lot of these Western bankers in the 1920s, bringing in Arm & Hammer, a lot of these, globalist financiers into buying up the former, Russian Empire and just selling off, just asset stripping, just totally selling off agriculture industry to international financial powerhouses, again, like Arm & Hammer. That was a big part of the 1920s. And that's the new economy policy. That's where Soros got the name for it. That's where George Bush Sr. came up with the name, whether it was him or some other Trilateral Commission member, I don't know, but Operation Hammer in 1992 to apply to Russia, to prepare the privatization of Russia. That was Operation Hammer, was Arm & Hammer. It was an homage to Arm & Hammer. He also oversaw the Oriental Petroleum, Arm & Hammer, right? That was in the 1980s, working with David Rockefeller to privatize the entire, Chinese, to get Western financial powers to take control of the entire Chinese economy. That was, yeah. So
let's chime in some detail about the privatization of East Germany, which was overseen by Hjalmar Schacht's grandson.
Right. You've done a lot of work on that. Yeah. Can you say something more about that?
Yeah. So privatization of East Germany was conducted via the Treuhandgesellschaft, which was a trust, basically, where all the companies and industry of East Germany were put together, and it was put in charge of first quite independent politician, manager, Detlef Carsten Rohwedder, who was assassinated when he resisted a strong deindustrialization and selling out to Western conglomerates. So he was assassinated, and it was tied to a Red Army faction, so terrorists who assassinated an honored German manager, and everyone was crying crocodile tears about this. But in effect, it was something much more sinister, very probably, that there was someone who was resisting this push for deindustrialization. And in his stead, Birgit Breuel was appointed. She had been, so she's tied to a Schroders banking conglomerate. So Schröder, Münchmeyer, Hengst and Co. was a German private bank which went down eventually. So she was from the Münchmeyer section of that Schröder, Münchmeyer, Hengst and Co. And so therefore she has been a daughter of one of those major bankers tied to also Kurt von Schröder, Hitler's member in the BIS directorate, who also was a Schroeder's guy. So, and her what's the word in English? I keep forgetting. So her right-hand man was Norman von Scherpenberg, and von Scherpenberg was, as I said, the grandson of Hjalmar Schacht, and his first name, Norman von Scherpenberg, is a direct homage to Montague Norman, the director of the Bank of England in the 1920s, who, of course, handled, as Matt and Cynthia have pointed out, handled Hjalmar Schacht for the oligarchy and steered him, Schacht had been basically a nobody before he became Reichsbank president. He had some, he came into banking via public relations. And so this is something which is a little known, but he was basically groomed by Norman Montague. And from there, he then had his grandson named after him, so Norman von Scherpenberg, who oversaw basically, as right-hand man to Baker Boyle, the privatization and deindustrialization of East Germany after the fall of the war.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy, eh? Well, Horace Greeley, Hjalmar Schacht, you know his name as well? His birth name is Horace Greeley Schacht, right?
Yes.
Horace Greeley, yes. Hjalmar Schacht. And Horace Greeley, even though he's got his two parents are from noble, like high blood families, but they chose to name him Horace Greeley in homage of their hero, Horace Greeley, the newspaper publisher.
Only his mother is of noble. His mother is of noble descent, of Danish noble descent, and his father was a commoner, but he was very much influenced by Horace Greeley in New York, and they had to leave America, come back to Germany, and which is why Schacht then eventually was trained in Germany.
Interesting, because in my research, Horace Greeley plays one of the most nefarious roles in the subversion of the United States and the creation of a new religion. He was the earliest sponsor of the Fox Sisters, of spiritualism, the channeling, the movement that promoted the idea that you could talk to the dead through specially gifted young girls who are channelers, sometimes boys. And that just became like a weird, it was really a fervent religion from the 1840s on up until the 1920s. And again, Greeley was the top-down propagandist for it in all of his control over media. He was promoting, anecdotal stories of different people giving testimonials of how this works in levitation and other things, just driving the population insane. At the same time as he's working with these Wall Street bankers that were trying to subvert the Union and undermine the entire, foundation of the Republic that during the Civil War itself. So, Greeley represents, again, something which isn't specifically American either, but there's you always kind of brush up against this thing, right? In these researches, this other, these mystery cult things that are just always kind of present behind the geopolitical materialist considerations of political shenanigans. But what you've said about his grandson and the privatization of East Germany, so important. It's it's crazy.
I mean, there's another. No, sorry, Grace.
No, go ahead. No.
There's another detail to it, which is a little bit more academic in a way, but we know that after Germany was defeated or the Nazis were defeated after World War II or at the end of World War II, then of course the question was how to rebuild Germany and how to make sure that something like this never happens, and gets also investigated as to how it could happen in the first place. But we know from various political decisions and various people being put in places, not only the head of the Chancellery, Hans Globke, who was a leading Nazi race philosopher, race lawyer, but also Reinhard Gehlen, of course, about whom you have also published a lot, being head of the intelligence service for Germany, who had been a Nazi general and spy for Hitler, spied on Russia, and which is probably what got him onto the payroll of the CIA or Dulles afterwards. But those two, for example, they met regularly until the mid-60s, 1960s. They met and discussed personnel decisions for the German government and affiliated institutions, such as the Institute for Contemporary History in Germany, which was responsible for investigating the Nazi history of Germany, and so they handpicked their candidates and discarded others who might have been more rigorous in their research. So this is something which is interesting. And one of the professors at the Institute for Contemporary History is also a son of Hjalmar Schacht.
Well, they love keeping this in the family, eh? So what sorts of narratives did they promote for Germans, and I guess an international audience, to set? What was the record that they wanted to have of what World War II was? And
they had a very controlled way of investigating, and so which is some people, of course, I mean, they were responsible for writing most of the expert testimony as to how compromised people have been during the Auschwitz, no, not the Auschwitz processes. There was another very prominent series of trials in Germany. Anyway, I forgot. So there is a very prominent anti-Nazi a series of trials in Frankfurt and other places, which was depended on the expertise of the Institute for Contemporary History, and so therefore they had to deliver some culprits, right? But a lot of people went unscathed, and this is something where I think that they were most useful in containing this investigation and directing the narrow discourse.
What about Alfred Herrhausen? What tradition is he tapping into? The Deutsche Bank president who was assassinated by the Red Brigade? I guess it was the Red Brigades. I don't know. Probably Nazis.
Well, it was pinned to the Red Brigades, but it was. Yeah. I mean, Dick Pullman has worked extensively on this. It had been carried out with extensive precision, which the Red Brigade would not have been possible. Would not have been capable of doing, of pulling it off. I mean, he had, as one of the leading bankers, he had the top level protection, and they still got to him, and they knew how to get to him with the specific device which they conducted. So Herrhausen is a case in point. He was classically trained, but he was trained in the Nazi era. So therefore, there was also some connections. He knew a lot of people, which is why he got to where he came eventually. But he was a very independent and I think conscientious manager who had a clear understanding of, for example, the potential of cooperation between Germany and Russia, and which is, so Dirk Pullman has said, which is, I haven't investigated this deeper, which is one reason why he became so dangerous when the wall eventually fell, because he was in a very important position and could influence stuff, which is why he was not allowed to live for much longer after the fall of 1989. The story that he was killed by Red Army brigades is something which is not credible from many points, because he was not the clear-cut, ultra imperialist manager. He had been advocating policies of cooperation, global cooperation, economic cooperation, debt relief for Africa and stuff, which was very, very unpopular with the imperial faction.
Right. Yeah. What about Hermann Abs? Was he good or bad? Because I got contrary messaging in reading about him as the dude who was in charge of a big, industrial recovery and Marshall Plan stuff in Germany after World War II. But then again, he's got all these like Nazi connections and seems to be supporting the growth of this Nazi apparatus. So what's your assessment? Is he on the side of angels, or is he playing a double game, or is he just a direct Nazi?
I would be very interested in learning what exactly would have been his really shining policies. I mean, clearly he steered the German reindustrialization in the way that he was very, very crucial for where funds went eventually, and this is true. But we must remember that he was, first of all, he was the one who paid Hitler's paycheck as a chancellor. Okay, so he was with the Delbrück banking company who was in charge of paying the chancellor, which is just a minor detail and it may not mean much, but we have to look where he ended, where he went and continued to go. And that is clearly, there's one event, which is the 1952, I think it was, the London Conference, which settled the German debt question, reparations question, for good. And it was only after that something like Bilderberg was possible to come into place again. And so Abs has to be seen in this context. And Bilderberg, of course, was something where it is said that the Nazi money, which had been shipped abroad following August of 1944 meeting at the Red Mansion Hotel in Strasbourg, which was called by the SS, and which is documented in congressional records. So it's not an invention. It is for real. And so there, the heads of German industry had been summoned by the SS and had been told that until August 1944, it had been a capital crime to divert funds from Germany abroad. From then, it was an order. So they were ordered in August of 1944 to ship all the assets abroad, everything there was, which was August of 1944. In September of 1944, we have the Operation Market Garden, which was the biggest Allied landing operation via air, which failed at the bridge of Arnhem, within eyesight of the Bilderberg Hotel. Okay, you have to watch this detail. It was within eyesight of the Bilderberg Hotel where this bridge was taken by the Germans, which could not be held by the lightly armed British soldiers who had gotten there. They fought courageously, but they had to declare defeat. And so this happened in 1944 in September. Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands was Dutch Supreme Commander by then. He had just been promoted shortly before that. He was not allowed by Eisenhower to get to the very detailed information, but he was allowed by the British, who Montgomery, of course, was the Field Marshal, and so there was this tiny detail where a Dutch spy had been caught by the British counter espionage, who had arrested him because he was so suspicious. It was him who had escaped as the only person from all ambushes and operations within Germany, and only this guy had been able to escape a number of times. No one else survived those operations, and eventually, so this Colonel Oeste Pinto, who had written a book about it, eventually he set him, put him in jail, and wanted him to be questioned right before Operation Market Garden, and it was on the order of Prince Bernhard that this man was released, because he was critical for the operations to inform the Dutch resistance of the upcoming invasion, and of course we know that the Germans got wind from this by this spy, who later was he suffered a mysterious death in a hospital in Holland after he had been captured. So this is something where we can assume foul play, and a lot has been written about it, that Prince Bernhard has not been upright with his actions for the Allies, and instead has been warning the Nazis. Of course, Bernhard was a Nazi, was an SS officer, which he had lied about. He was a Nazi party member, which he had lied about, and this is all something which puts together a picture. So this operation, had it succeeded, had Operation Market Garden succeeded, the Allied forces would have reached the Ruhr area, where the industrial powerhouse of Germany was, in early October, November, whatever. So the war would have been over by Christmas. And had that happened, the shipping of German assets abroad would not have been completed. So therefore, this had to be aborted. And this is the story of the Bilderberg meeting, which was only so shipping abroad the assets, which later come back 10 years later exactly, at the same place, with an eyesight of the bridge of Arnhem, is something which is extremely macabre, and this is something where Abs plays a critical role, Hermann Josef Abs, in facilitating the settlement of the German reparations before this could take place, because this was not possible otherwise. And this is something which casts a serious doubt. There are many more about Hermann Josef Abs and his role with the oligarchy.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy.
So much we don't know, and sometimes it's so scary to know what we don't know. Then, of course, the question is always, what are we going to do about it, or can we change anything? So maybe if you have any thoughts, any of you have thoughts on what you have seen in the last 10 days that maybe Trump has been giving orders, because some people, say they're good, some people think they're not good. So, how they will always say also that, is that a continuation of the first Trump, or a continuation of Biden? And there's even a question here from the audience, and saying, you may have touched this already, Matt, that it says, well, what about the number of secret societies again, and organizations related to the Illuminati that are behind the movement to continue to take down the Republic and continue to sell whatever democracy they say what it is? So, and another follow-up question of the same person is, who do you think was really in control of the U.S. for the last 12 years before Trump?
Who was in control of the what in the last 12 years?
Of United States.
Oh.
Before Trump or what? So anyway, please, whatever you can share, and Uwe and Drago, and do share your thoughts.
Drago, you wanna take a shot at this, or should?
Well, I mean, I'm actually enjoying what you and Uwe are talking about, because I'm not as well versed in this as either of you, not nearly. So I'm enjoying. I actually wanted to ask, what do you guys think about Trump's second term? Because it seems to me that his first term was like him defending himself from the deep state for 4 years essentially. And now it seems to me that he's far more confident. He's ready to make moves which are, let's say, which he probably wouldn't have dared in 2016. So, do you think that he is going to be able to, drain the swamp, or do you think he's going to drown in it?
Yeah, it overlaps the previous set of questions too, and your great questions. My considerations, I'll share my considerations, what I'm thinking about on this without giving an answer that I don't have. So I'm not going to pretend that I know things. My assessment so far is a bit nuanced, but obviously we can list good things, very, very good things that are disruptive and positive for sure. We can list them. His reassertion of sovereignty over the internationalists that wanted to impose the COP 2028 or the Paris Accords from 2014 and the carbon quota restrictions as the basis of a new Green New Deal carbon or decarbonization based economy premised around actually the effective depopulation, which was always the core design, and the stripping of nations of the ability to have industrial power to support the growth of their people. And that pulling out of the Paris Accords has been good. It's also created I think a very nice wave of discussions in other nations around the world, around other nations doing the same. I see that in Argentina. There's some evidence of similar things in Asia. Same thing for the World Health. His announcement to get out of the World Health Organization has created in Malaysia. The prime minister there has made an announcement that they want to get out of the World Health Organization. In Kenya, similar discussions. India, there's Indian advisors to the government that have also floated India's removal from the WHO. The idea of getting rid of immunities, legal immunities that have been granted to pharmaceutical parasites that could not be sued for decades or since the early 90s. That seems like that could come undone as well, which is a nice sense of justice. The shutting down of the proposal to shut down the IRS to fire the 86,000 employees, and those who don't want to take their severance packages can go and be sent to the U.S. border to secure the borders around Mexico. These are all fun things, that I appreciate. The hoped for proposal for getting some adult dialogue around long-term self-interest and peacemaking on the Ukraine front or the Middle East is hopeful, but we'll see where that goes. Certainly Zelensky's pissed. His shutdown of the U.S. aid also, or there's a cancellation of all U.S. aid approvals and grants to operations abroad. That's being frozen. So that's going to make it hard to carry out the sorts of color revolutionary activity that the U.S. has been thriving on for decades. We'll see how that benefits Serbia, or we'll see if there's any quick measurable effects to the current color revolutionary operations in East Europe that are underway. We'll see. I hope so. Then we've got the transhumanist thing. So for me, it's the transhumanist cult that gives me the creeps. And there's obviously an agreement. Some deals have been made behind the scenes where it's like all the doors open for Trump, right? Like all of the resistance to Trump disappeared, implying a top-down decision to allow this to happen. I think Trump has given, again, a lot of promises to very creepy transhumanists that I despise around Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, who represent something that I don't see as favorable to the human species. And so part of it, there's I think partially compromises. In my research on Canadian history, I had to deal with this phenomenon quite a bit and trying to unravel what is this thing called Canada and how I wrote a series of books called The Untold History of Canada, and I had to sort of train my mind to sort of look for things which were materially good, because I like bursts of technological progress that allows us to uplift our cultural standards, mental standards, educational standards, all these things which the empire doesn't ever want. They don't want those things to ever happen. But they do happen. But why do they happen in Canada when we've been such a controlled part of the great game run by the British Privy Council, the British Empire? we've almost always been controlled by this agency that desires ultimately feudalism as their preferred model of organizing society. So how did we get these bursts of progress? In some cases, there were fights by good people who fought against this deep state. More often than not, though, it was, whether I'm looking at the case of Canada after the Civil War, when there was a big movement after Lincoln came out victorious to join the United States. A lot of pro-Republican figures were active in the Canadian political and business class, which were all saying we either need to have our own republic independent from the empire or simply join the United States, because the US was not yet empire. It was animated by a different spirit than the crappy thing we've seen do damage to the world in our lifetimes. And so that would have been preferable, in my opinion, at that time, but there was a fight to sabotage them. Some were murdered. Some of those supporters of true, of real progress were absolutely murdered in the 1870s, 80s. And instead, the British Empire had to make certain adjustments to keep control of Canada as a geopolitical tool within the broader Great Game, which was primarily to keep Canada as a wedge between the danger of U.S.-Russian collaboration on the Arctic. That was one of the big dangers that Canada was designed to prevent, that type of organic, embrace. So what they had to do, though, there was because of so many Canadians looking at the increased living standards, the optimism around progress in the U.S., they wanted that too. They're like, why do we have to live like shit when the Americans, our cousins who also speak English, are living so much better than us? And so that cultural expectation resulted in a threat to the empire, where they were like, well, to keep control of this asset, I guess we'll unleash a degree of technological progress, will allow for the development of a rail line, which they would never have permitted that if it wasn't done to keep Canada under the clutches of the empire. Now, does that mean that the building up of the rail lines and the industrial development of the 1870s, 80s, 90s, is that a bad thing? No, it's not a bad thing. I mean, a lot of good came out of it. It pulled together the best of the people. Entrepreneurs came into being that would not have existed otherwise. Great innovators and scientists were able to move into that space where there was like a restoration of a spirit of progress encouraged. That's good. That's a difficult genie to put back in the bottle when you unleash technological progress. But they did put it back in the bottle, and it took it took a couple of world wars. It took some economic chaos, economic warfare of speculators, running roughshod for a few decades that started demoralizing and undermining what was done positively on a physical level in the 1880s, 1890s. And the thing was, in the case of Canada, it happened again when it was becoming clear that the Hitler Frankenstein monster was not being as obedient as some had thought it was going to be. And there was a big battle inside of the British High Command over whether they would continue with the Hitler strategy or whether they would abort it and sort of reorganize and fight another day, as Uwe beautifully, eloquently outlined what happened as far as the reorganization of strategy through the Bilderberg group run by a bunch of unreconstructed Nazis, and the co-opting of these high-level Nazis into the Western NATO secret armies, right, and CIA. That only occurred through a battle royale within the British aristocracy and the American governing class too, but primarily it was at the time the decision makers then over what to do, whether to put down Frankenstein or whether to keep supporting Frankenstein, even if it meant taking on a junior partner status in the New World Order instead of being the senior partner. They were like, some were willing to take on junior partner status. Other ones were like, no, it's senior partner or nothing. It's too much. We don't want to risk losing that degree of control. So when the Churchill faction ended up becoming successful, who were fascist genocidalists? Churchill was a total genocidalist, asshole. That being said, he was more religiously committed to the British Empire than anything else. So they didn't have the means of production in England to do the work, to do the job. And so they needed to once again unleash a bit of the shackles, the chains against creativity that they had imposed on their colonies, on Australia and Canada especially, which was, okay, we're going to allow, because we need the Canadian resources, we need the industrial base that we destroyed. We consciously destroyed it for decades, but now we need what we destroyed. So we're going to try to figure out a way to unleash it again, and they permitted it. And again, Canada became an industrial hub, technological progress, an optimism for the future was the consequence culturally, things that the empire doesn't like because it's not conducive to feudalistic societies of people who adapt like animals to a cage. That type of culture of intelligent people, positive about the future and building things, right? They just don't want that, but it was a necessary evil. And they're like, maybe we can undo it. Maybe we can figure out how to put the genie back in the bottle, but it's a necessary gamble, so we'll do it. And I feel like I'm seeing something that reminds me of that in sort of the plan to, if you're going to beat Russia and China, and if Russia and China are not, they're not willing to just die, as perhaps was hoped 25 years ago, that they would be more inclined to just sit in the building that would be put through a controlled demolition, and we'll reward some corrupt oligarchs in China and Russia to be local controllers of the New World Order in that jurisdiction, and they'll be happy, lording over their slave class. That might have been the wish for some of those strategists 25, 30 years ago, but it's clearly not the case that the current leadership within China, Russia, and the broader multipolar alliance, they're not on board with that at all. So where you have a real embrace of industrial production, cultural excellence, educational excellence, meritocracy to get the job done within their political class as well as in the business class, it's a very different idea of economics in Asia than we have in the West. You go to jail for speculating on junk bonds or derivatives in China. For the most part, you go to jail. Whereas here, we still practice that as something where we teach students to do in macroeconomics in Harvard. So if you're going to beat them, you can't beat them if you're committed to depopulation and green Gaia cult worshiping woke nothingness. Like, you just can't. Mediocrity is not going to work. And you can't blow out the banking system if you don't beat them first, because if you blow out the Western banking system and they're not locked into the Western banking system, then the world will jump on board the type of the economic power of the gravitational force of China's Belt and Road Initiative and the type of spirit of hope coming out of that type of long-term thinking that puts human beings in a position of real value. That will attract all of Africa, Latin America. Probably you'll get movements across Europe to do, to also jump on board the only ship that floats, and the empire will lose its power. So they're like, well, I think they've been in a desperate sort of, I'm seeing evidence of a desperate attempt to reconfigure certain things to allow for an unleashing of creativity, but in a type of controlled way, where they have to figure out how do they undo 60 years of self-annihilation and stupidifying their own people. How do they undo that in a way that's going to allow them to compete economically with Russia and China and others? Which, again, I don't even know if they can do that, but I see evidence that they're trying to do that by reshoring industry, trying to figure out how to create sort of that Orwellian model of like, we're going to have a technate. So I'm not saying Trump wants this necessarily. I'm just saying, like, this is one of the designs being put on the table by people like Peter Thiel or Elon Musk, who do represent this more vicious thing, in my view, which is let's bring back what Elon Musk's grandpa was championing for this North American technate. You guys have probably all seen those images, right? Back in the 30s under Technocracy Inc. With an Iron Dome sort of military shield, like a missile shield, both surrounding this technate that extends from Greenland down to the Darien Gap and below, and through the Arctic, as well as space weaponry. Greenland, we know, is also one of the key hubs of America's Space Force and Space Command, which Elon Musk and Starlink is heavily enmeshed in. So I think that according to the Project for a New American Century neocons Straussians, which Peter Thiel is a self-identified member of the Straussian movement. Self-identified. He wrote about his position of his role within the Straussian movement, within his 2007 essay, The Straussian Moment. It's actually, he called it that. And so, he's not a solo operator. He's sort of a cutout, but a smart one, but a cutout nonetheless, representing dark forces that I've mapped out I'm pretty confident about how I've mapped them out, that would like to rebrand the neocon crusader Knights of Malta sort of ethic of a clash of civilizations, but they need to rebrand it to a new generation of conservatives who have come to be disgusted by the old neocon marketing. And so a lot of them think that MAGA would be a good rebranding that they could sort of retrofit the effects of, but within a nationalist sort of language. But that would be wrapped around kind of like what they did for Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany had a lot of industrial growth, a lot of scientific excellence, which is applaudable in Nazi, like look at Peenemünde, right? Like the aerospace engineers, it was incredible what type of accomplishments were being done, and the translation of scientific cutting edge science into the commercial, or not commercial, but into the practicable industrial system was real. So there's a streamline between R&D and practical production, which is very important for any type of functional society. You need to have that connection of pure and applied metaphysics, where the mind exists, making discoveries with the universe and God's creation, with the material part of the economy. You got to, and which also involves upgrading the education system, and improving the educational textbooks as quickly as possible to incorporate new discoveries, so that you don't get locked into old, obsolete modes of thinking that are crystallized and stagnant, that reject new thoughts. You don't want to allow that to happen. Otherwise you get entropic, you get, you atrophy. So there were good things that were laudable within the German the German fascist system, but it was also wrapped up in thick layers of really bad philosophy and really bad superstitious science around Wotanism, Teutonic knighthood worshipping crap, and all of this weird stuff that Himmler was promoting in Wewelsburg Castle with New Templars. It was crazy. So they layered authentic science with thick layers of crazy. They have channelers with the Vril Society channeling, they had sexual oracles channeling Vril energy for the higher SS purebloods, New Templars to tap into their Teutonic purity of whatever. Anyway, it was, so I do see a sort of 21st century new, or a renewal of these superstitious mythologies, but now incorporating a little bit more UFOs, ET demons, interdimensional alien hybrid blah blah blahs that they're circulating and pushing in the Congress with the, and a lot of Republicans are, as well as Democrats, both, but a lot of the Republicans who like Trump, and I don't think that they're necessarily bad people, have gotten very much swept up into this rebranded UFO disclosure thing, which they're going to be doing. Like, it's going to get loud. And one of the narratives I'm noticing that they're putting out there, even in mainstream media, that they're preparing our minds. They've been preparing our minds for like 40 years, but it's really increasing in amplitude, is the idea that the new technologies that we will begin to start seeing more and more in the energy sector and in industrial sector and other things, we will start seeing a lot more new tech emerge. And they're trying to tell us that all of this came from reverse engineering of alien spacecrafts that crash landed at Roswell and Aztec, New Mexico, and a few other locations. In fact, the CIA just put out some whistleblower promoted on CNN saying, oh yeah, we've actually found 9 crashed UFOs since 2001. 9. Like these, like, it's kind of, I get pissed when I hear this, because it demands such a stupidification. I don't want to insult people who are listening, but if I am, I'm sorry that I'm insulting listeners out there who might be listening, but it demands such a low level, unsophisticated mindset to presume that you could even have a civilization that has grown and advanced to such an extent that they could have faster than light speed aircraft or whatever craft that could be so advanced that it could like skip from one dimension to another dimension, that it could enter ours, but yet it can't fly and keeps on crashing into the ground. Like, come on. But that's what they're putting out. So I think that that's the thing. They want to really sort of create this new UFO religion. And you see Tucker Carlson bringing on guests to promote the new narrative that they're going to infuse, that demons gave us aliens. Tucker Carlson even gave his opinion that he believes demons have caused nuclear or atomic science. He said that publicly, like he wasn't joking. So that's the thing. So that's the layer of crazy that they want to wrap the new cutting edge discovery, because they know that they can't allow for human beings to understand that our nature is to make discoveries when we're using our minds in a very specific way that everybody can do. And when we're self-examining our assumptions and we've got a passion that we awaken for truth beyond the limits of our knowledge, and we use rigor and discipline and joy of discoveries and sharing that for making the world a better place. So when we activate those higher sentiments of love that Schiller talks about in all of his philosophical writings, and Uwe has given wonderful lectures on this. Whenever we do that, we become more human, we become less manageable, we become more in tune with the universe and God's creation, and we act accordingly to make life better for our kids. And so that's the secret of science. Science is very sacred in that sense. And the only way that they can have the benefits of science, but not the substance of it, which is better people who are less inclined to adapt like animals to Malthusian, depopulation or carrying capacities. They need to do this other thing. And it involves a lot of Satanists that have taken over the U.S. military. It involves a lot of New Templar creeps that were followers of Aleister Crowley, that oversaw the revolution in military affairs, that brought in, a reorganization of science around the creation of modern quantum mechanics, which is a garbage science. It's all garbage. There's nothing good in modern quantum mechanics. It's mostly all garbage that was designed to subvert the discoveries of Max Planck, of Madame Curie, all of the people who were making real discoveries. They were fighting against the Niels Bohr, Heisenberg, anti-humanist faction of mathematical statisticians who denied truth could exist. They denied it religiously, and they battled at the Copenhagen or the Solvay conference, sponsored by the Rockefellers in 1928. And there was this big battle royale between the two schools, the old guard of scientists who were making discoveries into the nature of the quantum and the macrocosm, who had an abiding faith in God's creation, and versus the other new school of mathematical fetishists who didn't believe in truth, but they only believed in statistical probability theory, like the science of rolling the dice. And that the only science permitted should be a science of statistical descriptive modeling, which would be a modeling that would be conducive to creating imaginary universes and dimensions to justify string theory models, Big Bang cosmology, which would have, they would just start grafting on a make-believe universe, calling it science, that could justify everything and anything. And there would be, so there's this big fight, and we were told that Einstein and Max Planck were the old guards. They lost because they were obsolete, and the new guards of the Copenhagen school, they were the creative vanguards of the new standard models, right? And that became the thing that was put into the Manhattan Project. So the only scientists allowed to start managing science in the secret science programs of the followers of H.G. Wells, which was the Manhattan Project. They were the followers of this, like Oppenheimer and Szilard, and they were people who denied truth. They brought in the Copenhagen interpretation, saying that only scientists who abide by this will be allowed to keep their jobs, and those who don't will be fired. They iced out, Kurt Gödel and Einstein were iced out. They weren't allowed to play a role in that. Max Planck was iced out of German science because the only scientists that were allowed to sort of come into managerial positions were scientists who were part of the occult. Maybe they were the exception now and again because they still needed talented scientists to come up with discoveries at the end of the day. So you did have some engineers that were brought in who were not necessarily occultists, but a lot of them, the best minds were iced out of it. So, Max Planck was in Germany, but he wasn't allowed to play a role in science. So, that sort of thing is now we're several generations into it, where they've been able to create things like chaos theory in the 60s, that promoted the idea of a new mystification of science, that we don't need thought, or we don't need to have reason or intention or design in human economies to make, or we don't have to assume purposefulness anywhere in the universe by just allowing for the assumption that fundamental randomness and randomness is at the heart of all of creation, including human activity, that we can assume that what we see at what appears to be ordered states of existence, whether it's, planets being in certain orbits or snowflakes having 6 sides instead of 7, or, human economies seeming to progress and having infrastructure. That's just the consequence of random, self-organization of systems devoid of any thought or purposefulness. It's just an illusion. It's emergent. They're emergent. It's this cybernetics language that they've been promoting. Emergent technologies, emergent theory. That that AI will naturally become emergent and start self-reflecting and becoming sentient at some foreseeable, 2045, and then it'll start deciding that we're a virus that has to be exterminated unless we integrate. Right. So Elon and Peter Thiel have this great solution, and Yuval Harari have this great solution to avoid extermination by the future AI that probably have already time traveling powers that maybe already seated Donald Trump's grandson, Barron Trump, who had visited us in the 1890s, and then Trump is a time traveler with Bobby or John F. Kennedy Jr. And they've built up a pretty wild cosmology premised around this idea. But the whole thing is based on a rejection of what people like Max Planck and Franklin Roosevelt and Leibniz and Kepler and Plato, all of the people who moved society forward and broke the powers of the empire, they all thought in a very different way about the nature of the creation, and the process of creating, and the moral effects of living in a world where everybody is made in the living image of a reasonable, loving creator. That idea that gave rise to the American Revolution, that Benjamin Franklin was governed by, that Abraham Lincoln was governed by, that spread around the world in a science of political economy that nearly destroyed the empire, unless they did 2 world wars and demoralized people again and broke this out of us. That reality is I think much more in tune with truth, and they have to always obscure that.
Oh shoot! Oh, what happened to Matt?
Let's hope he's back.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, he's incredible. His knowledge is vast, and not just the knowledge, but the fact that he understands all these things and how they are interconnected. There are very, very few people like him.
There he is.
I'm sorry.
I'm glad Matt, you did time travel and you came back.
Yes.
Okay, but Matt,
yes, this is me from 8 hours from now.
Grace,
don't drink the lemonade. Don't drink the lemonade, okay?
But all these things you just recently mentioned are in your book, The Science Unshackled, and then the succeeding book. So go ahead again and share your other books. And Roy, before Matt leaves us, do you have any thoughts you want to share?
Well, it's been fascinating as always. I always feel more intelligent after listening to Emma. And I wish you mentioned about AI. I wish we get a Matt AI, because I'm finding most of the AI is spewing out lies. And if we could have one that does what you're saying, it would be great. With the different things we talk about China. What happened with TikTok recently? They thought it was going, and apparently there was something in China that's similar. One of my guests was on telling me about this red notice or something it's called. No. And then people were actually connecting and kind of going, what? Because they all thought, oh, this is a social system and how bad China was. And they're learning that it's quite the opposite. So it's fascinating that, you know, how they're trying to control things. It kind of fell back against them. And like, you know, you're talking about Trump. I mean, we had the late Scott Bennett on, and we had a deep conversation about things that he's done. And it got removed. My episode got removed from Spotify. So it's, is there things that are happening that are great? The Who, but he didn't say he's out of it. He kind of mentioned, we could come back in kind of thing. And, you know, you were talking about Roosevelt with the polio. I mean, Trump actually mentioned, hey, there is some jabs that are safe, and he mentioned polio. So, you know, and then they had a guy talking about the cancer thing. So for me, it's shocking that the whole world is living in, well, most of the West, living in hope, crossing their fingers, thinking Trump is a savior. But as you mentioned, Musk and a few other people, like once you trace back who they're connected to, what they've done, it's a dangerous thing to be putting so much hope in all these different people. So all I say is we have to do it individually and take it at local level and just see how we can actually control this, instead of just going, he's going to be our savior. Because I think, you know, people just listening to all the information that you share and how everything is connected, and, you know, all these secret societies. I know somebody mentioned it, but I had it down as well. Like they say Trump wasn't connected to one. Was he or not? I don't know. But he was apparently, with one of his bankruptcies, bailed out. Was it the Rockefellers or somebody like that? So, you know, you just kind of who he's connected with. And it doesn't add up. There's so many different things that are coming together, that positive and negative. And we're getting a few little bonus wins. But like, if we look at, say, the digital currency, the one world currency, like, you know, you'd understand paganism and all the different symbols. Like the Bitcoin white paper was released on Halloween. And, you know, it looks like everything that they're doing is trying to get people into crypto, which in turn is a digital currency that they can control everything, and everything is traceable. So I just say buyer beware with everything that's going on.
Buyer beware. Amen. Yeah, that's words of wisdom, literally. No, I agree. I think crypto is I am so unenthusiastic about crypto. It's ridiculous. And blockchain. Okay, great. Yeah, if you have a humanist moral society and paradigm animating you, sure, fine. But do we have that? No, we got a death cult. So will that be, you know, I don't see any of these technologies as intrinsically bad per se, you know, like convenience wise, every technology that makes things more convenient, it could be good. It's just that's why it's so important to have people focused on the principle of culture and the paradigm of morality as primary to every other consideration. Because if you don't have your culture qualitatively improving faster, or at least as fast as your technological progress is increasing, then it will get out of control. Then whatever technologies are going to be brought into being are going to be used to enslave and kill you by those actual real forces that have always been there, managing mystery cults and maintaining a sociopathic, unnatural culture for an elite since ancient times. That's a fact that we should be bringing into our calculus that they don't teach. They've written that out of our theoretical models of political economy, history. The reality of oligarchical systems and the associated culture, which is eminently investigatable, of how oligarchies, what oligarchical systems believe in, what is their cosmology, what is their definition of human nature, what practices have they come to infiltrate their victims, to get good people to be stupid and to undo themselves, what techniques have they come across to groom their own to perpetuate this unnatural system. All of these things are eminently explorable. And a healthy education system should incorporate a study of oligarchical systems when you're looking at, well, what caused this war between Persia and Greece? Why did Rome fail in its republican aspirations and embrace empire? What caused that? Well, try to explain that without any reference to the mystery cults and hereditary powers. Try it. You won't. It'll be incompetent. So, you know, that's what I always encourage people to put more place on their minds and their aesthetical sensibilities, to become more rigorous in that sense when it comes to the culture that we will allow ourselves to be shaped by, because the oligarchy has tried to give us a shit culture that reduces our powers of feeling and thinking like the best part of ourselves could be. That we got this best part of ourselves inside of us that wants to come out, and it can't come out if we allow for the types of cultural standards that the oligarchy has encouraged in music, in media, in literature, and all of this other stuff. If that's what we allow to be the thing, that soil will not produce the seed that wants to grow into the best part of us that we can be. So, there's that. As far as the secret societies are concerned, yeah, that's a thing that's always concerning to me. And at the same time, I don't think you can never make judgments based on somebody's association with a bad thing. So I know that there have been good people who have gone to Bilderberger meetings, but they weren't bad people. They went to the Bilderberger meeting, but they weren't the bad people. They weren't part of the inside club, or they went to the World Economic Forum, or, there's people who are, as was pointed out, Tulsi Gabbard was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. It's a vetting process. It's something that is part of the game, but it doesn't mean that the person has necessarily sold their soul to the thing. Some people will go in for the sake of wanting to check off the things they have to check off in order to get the street cred to go and get the higher influential job, or they were making a bad decision and they became better. John F. Kennedy Jr. went to the London School of Economics. He was being groomed by Harold Lasky and by Julian Huxley when he was young. They had big things in mind for John F. Kennedy, but they underestimated that the power of his patriotism and his intellectual fortitude was enough to inoculate him from that conditioning, and he became a much more sovereign person. Of course, he had the help of advisors. Franklin Roosevelt was a 33rd degree Freemason of the Northern jurisdiction. Does that make what accounts for, though, that he was made that in 1909 or something? He went from the first degree to the 33rd degree in like 6 months. That's unheard of. But he was playing the game. Like it took J. Edgar Hoover 35 years to become 33rd degree. J. Edgar Hoover. So they made J. Edgar Hoover really wanted it. It was his life's mission to become initiated in the 33rd degree as a higher fool of the machine. They just put a rubber stamp on FDR because they're like, oh, you're born into a rich family, you got to do this. And they just gave him in 6 months. Ridiculous. They're like, okay, you got the rubber stamp. All right, now you can become naval secretary. Right. But so in some people, they just see it as a way to make associations, build careers, go through the thing, but they don't actually immerse their identity into it. So that's the thing I look at today. I mean, I don't know who is and who isn't a part of the thing, who's gone through the game in order just to like get street cred and to fight, and who has actually sold their soul to the devil. who one of the things I've noticed is that within a lot of these nefarious occult, like mystery cults, there's certain things that the initiate is told to do. They made fun of it there's a version of that in Kingsman, the movie Kingsman, where after doing a bunch of exercises and being tested, you have to like do something cold-hearted, like kill the puppy that you've been bonding with for 6 months. And for those who kill the puppy, they're told, you passed the test. Okay, go on to the next level. And for those who don't kill the puppy, they're told, you passed the test. Go on to this level. And both of them now are living in two different worlds, thinking that they're experiencing the next degree of their thing, but they're not. There's two. One has been identified as being intellectually not as useful, and they will get a different set of, 11th, 12th, 13th degrees after that. They're permanently labeled as not as useful. And then the ones who killed the puppy, they've got a different destiny in store for them. So these are all considerations that you have to kind of bring to the table when looking at these things in our current age. And I have a lot of hope that Russia, China, India, and the multipolar alliance, I've seen enough evidence that has totally persuaded me that their intelligentsia has a very good sense of the enemy, is playing a very sophisticated game, but is very committed to survival, where we are in much more precarious grounds our patriot class is much less educated, much less sophisticated, much more sloppy, and thus much more inclined to make bad decisions when it counts. And so that's the warning I'm putting out there. We got to be less sloppy if we're patriots who don't want to die, you know.
And just finally, I mean, what you mentioned there, I know somebody that's in the Freemasons, and I think he got to 18 degrees. He's the nicest guy that you could meet. And you know, we have to stop associating, and sometimes there's good. And even I know people that were going to Davos, and I was saying, I don't want to go there. And they basically said, we have to bring light into the darkness. And I was, ooh, I like that. So, you know, instead of walking away from it, bring light into the darkness.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you can do it, if you got the strength to go in there, go in there, do what you got to do, right?
Need a big flashlight.
Yeah, don't drink the baby blood. Just go in. Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you to Uwe. Thank you. He needs to go, but thank you, Uwe, and follow Uwe in his Substack. The Never Again is now global. Okay, that's Dr. Uwe Alschner, and he's always now and then he is a guest of Matthew. He just had his presentation, right, Matthew?
Yeah, he did a great thing on Leibniz. Yeah, and Drago, are you your work on Think BRICS is the BRICS Info BRICS is amazing. And question: would you be down to speak at a peace roundtable on Sunday that I'm hosting?
Yeah, of course. I actually saw the message. I'm not sure if you saw. I sent you a reply.
Oh,
yeah,
good.
Of course. I would be happy to.
Excellent. All right, I want to get you there on in the public recording so that you can't take it back. All right, good.
That's what I was.
I suppose, because I've been doing it for God knows how long, like half a decade.
Cool. Great.
That's what I was thinking. And of course, all links to Matthew's Rising Tide Foundation, CanadianPatriot.org, Matthew Ehret Substack. And there's another one. You have another Canadian, that's 17.
Oh, don't worry about it. It's already too much. CanadianPatriot.org is all my books. And Substack, MatthewEhret.substack.com. A lot of good stuff there too, I hope.
So, and do support also Roy Coughlan in his Awakening podcast, and will continue to connect with me. And if you have any question, it will be at graceasagra.com. And so that wraps up our conversation. And so for me, it's another eye-opening conversation. So please stay informed. There's no time to be complacent. There's no time not to stop your curiosity, okay? And do like, subscribe, and do everything that you can on your end to continue the studies. Take care, everyone. And Matthew, Drago, Roy, Uwe, myself, I thank myself. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. Thanks, guys. Bye, y'all.
Goodbye.